The year is 1963, and America faces a grave threat known as communism through the Vietnam jungles. Meanwhile, in the States, racial discrimination grows to its boiling point. On August 28th, civil rights leaders and 250,000 people gathered outside the Washington Monument to protest racial discrimination and to show support for major civil rights legislation that was pending in Congress. The march resulted in pressuring the administration of John F. Kennedy to initiate a strong federal civil rights bill in Congress. The March on Washington was where MLK conducted his famous I Have a Dream speech. But Martin Luther King wasn't the only prominent figure to show support during this event. Roy Wilkins, a prominent civil rights activist most known for his leadership of the National Association of Advancement of Colored People. John Lewis, an American politician and a prominent civil rights leader. A. Phillips Randolph was a leader of the civil rights movement, the American labor movement, and the socialist political parties. James Farmer, a civil rights activist and leader in the civil rights movement who believed in nonviolent protest to destroy segregation. Whitney Moore Young Jr. was a civil rights leader and spent most of his career working to end employment discrimination. Bayard Rustin was a leader in social movements for rights, socialism, nonviolence, and gay rights. And finally, Walter Reuther was a civil rights activist who built the United Automobile Workers into one of the most progressive labor unions in United States history. All attended this historic event to finally put an end to segregation.
Throughout the 1960s, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee became known primarily for holding nonviolent demonstrations, organizing grassroots groups, registering African American voters, and then eventually for advocating the philosophy of Black Power. During this period, the organization developed many different tactics and strategies that would encourage people to get involved with the cause and feel empowered to take a stand. In general, the tactics used by CNCC were decentralized and focused on local strategies more than the other civil rights organizations. This was done because not only was the group predominant in the South, where it had originated, but so many areas in the North also advocated CNCC's mission for Black equality and justice. In order to gain support, the leaders in each area needed to create strategies that would better cater to and persuade the particular audience that they were trying to recruit.
The March on Washington had many obstacles to carry it out. Franklin Delano Roosevelt made a promise to get rid of segregation by establishing the Fair Employment Practices Commission 1 year before the march occurred. The civil rights leaders came up with the idea of the March on Washington because the world found a way around the commission. Different groups of people had their own stories and beliefs about the march. Not all Caucasians in the neighborhood hated the idea of African Americans marching on D.C. for their rights. Some even joined them in the march. Also, propaganda was put out over the town to have the most possible activists fighting for what is theirs, their rights and freedoms. Although the marching activists wanted the Jim Crow laws disbanded, they were more focused on economic justice, like equal access to public facilities and accommodations, housing, education, and jobs.
As the greatest demonstration for freedom.
Although the March on Washington was the most famous of its kind during the civil rights movement, there was many other influential marches. The Selma marches in 1965 had 25,000 participants who marched on a 54-mile route from Selma, Alabama to the state capital of Montgomery. Both marches were successful, one leading to federal voting rights to protect African Americans' right to vote, and others strongly pressuring the Kennedy administration to pass a civil rights bill.
Black Lives Matter is a group of African American activists. Like many of the members of the March on Washington, the Black Lives Matter group focuses on the topic of no more violence towards African Americans and no more racial profiling. Whereas the March on Washington focused on no more violence towards African American rights, and like the Black Lives Matter activist group, the march also focused on getting rid of racism. On January 22, 2018, there was a march through Harlem, New York to highlight the topic of People's Monday. Although this march only had 10 activists, it was carried out in the same conduct as the March on Washington, with a march. And much like in Washington, the protest was followed by a speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Do we have time for bonus meme? Let's investigate. Sorry, we didn't have time for bonus meme. Perhaps next time you will be more lucky.